Welcome back to the deep dive. We're back with another massive stack of sources today.
Oh yeah, very heavy stack today.
And another pot of coffee, of course, which is necessary because, honestly, this is a topic I've been itching to get into. We are looking at Breaking Bad today.
Right, but we should clarify, we're not just doing a general overview of the show.
No, not at all. We are zooming in, way in, on a very specific, really pivotal moment in Season 3. It's Episode 8, titled I See You.
And, it's interesting you use the phrase zooming in, because this episode is generally remembered for being incredibly contained.
Yeah.
It's claustrophobic.
Yeah, totally.
It's what people in the TV industry call a bottle episode, or, well, at least a partial one, where the main characters are just stuck in one single location.
Right. In this case, a hospital waiting room. Which brings us to the dreaded hospital episode trope.
Yes, the classic trope.
You see this in literally every drama on television. From The Sopranos to Grey's Anatomy, someone gets hurt, everyone stands around looking sad, they're drinking that terrible vending machine coffee.
Pacing the hallways.
Exactly. But looking at the notes we have here, calling this just a hospital episode. I mean, it feels like calling the Titanic a boat trip.
It really does.
Yeah.
It's a huge disservice to what's actually happening on screen.
Yeah.
Because while the characters are physically sitting still, the tectonic plates of the show's entire universe are shifting violently right underneath them.
Yeah, it's not just a waiting game.
Right. This isn't just about waiting to see if a character lives or dies. It's about the exact moment the trap snaps shut.
Let's start with that title, ICU. On the surface, it's clever, right? We are in the ICU, the intensive care unit. Get it? ICU.
It's a very classic Breaking Bad pun. They love doing that.
But there's a much darker layer here, isn't there? Because when I was reading through the critical analysis in our packet, a lot of writers pointed out that this is the moment of true visibility.
That's the key right there, visibility. Think about the entire series up to this specific point. Walter White has been operating completely in the shadows.
He's a ghost.
Exactly. He's Heisenberg, this mythical unseen figure.
Yeah.
But ICU implies that the anonymity is completely gone. It's like a deadly game of tag, and someone just got tagged.
Yeah.
It's about characters who have been hiding in the dark, suddenly being exposed to these harsh, fluorescent hospital lights. The reality of what they've done.
It's a game of cat and mouse where the players finally lock eyes, and the stakes, I mean, they couldn't be higher for you as the viewer. We are dealing with the immediate fallout of the previous episode, 1 Minute, which, let's be real, was one of the most stressful things ever aired on television.
Oh, without a doubt. The parking lot shootout.
Exactly. Hank Schrader, the DEA agent, was attacked by the cousins, those two completely silent, axe-wielding Terminators from the Cartel. And he survived, but he's absolutely shredded.
And that's our starting point for today. The mission for this deep dive is to explore exactly how the show manages that emotional debris.
Emotional debris, I love that phrase.
Right. It's a term one of the critics used in our sources. Because we have the physical violence, which is over in literally a minute of screen time. But the emotional debris lasts forever.
It stains everything.
It does. So we need to look at how this violence completely shifts the power dynamic between Walt and his boss, Gus Fring, and how a confined setting ratchets up the tension to just unbearable levels.
We have a really great stack of sources to go through today. We've got plot summaries, production notes from the original air date back in May 2010, and some actually very divisive critical reception that we'll get into later.
Yeah, the critics were definitely split on this one.
But before we get to the critics, we really have to set the stage. The episode was written by Jennifer Hutchison and directed by Colin Buxey, and they make a very, very specific choice right at the very beginning.
They do. It's a fascinating choice because they don't start with the ambulance rushing down the street. They don't start with the weeping family.
No.
They start with Jesse Pinkman.
And this scene really threw me. You have Jesse, who is leaving the hospital. He's been there recovering from the brutal beating Hank gave him a few episodes back. And as he's being wheeled out, he sees Hank being wheeled in on a gurney.
It's a completely chaotic scene.
No.
We know from the medical notes in the script that Hank has 4 gunshot wounds. 4. He's in absolutely critical condition. It's blood everywhere, people shouting, paramedics running.
And Jesse just watches this. Now, normally, if you see a guy you know, even a guy you really hate bleeding out like that, you feel something, right? Shock, horror, maybe just basic human empathy.
You'd think so?
But Jesse
smiles.
He smiles. I couldn't believe it. It's this little quiet, private smirk. He gets into the car with Skinny Pete, and he looks, I don't know, he looks happy.
I wouldn't say happy exactly. I'd say he feels validated. You really have to unpack the psychology of Jesse Pinkman in this exact second. Because to the listener, to you and me, Hank is a hero. He just took down two heavily armed assassins.
Right, he's the good guy.
But to Jesse, Hank is the monster who broke into his house and beat him unconscious.
So when Jesse sees Hank physically broken on that stretcher, he isn't seeing a tragedy at all.
No, not even a little bit. He's seeing the universe balancing the books. The source material actually refers to this as karmic justice. And it's a very dangerous moment for Jesse's soul, if you think about it.
Because he's enjoying the suffering.
Exactly. He's looking at extreme, life-threatening violence, and his internal monologue is basically saying, good.
It creates this wild contrast. You have the intense gravity of Hank fighting for his life, literally seconds from death, and then you have Jesse just bouncing around in Skinny Pete's car, acting almost buoyant. It's like a massive weight has been lifted right off his shoulders.
It really reinforces the idea that Jesse is drifting further and further away from normal society. He's becoming desensitized to the violence. He's accepting that this is just how the world works now. You hurt me, the universe hurts you.
Speaking of a world of hurt, let's pivot to the workplace. Because while Hank is bleeding out in the ER, the meth still must flow. We go down into the superlab, and things are getting really awkward.
Awkward is putting it mildly. Walt is right in the middle of firing Gale Boetticher.
Oh, poor Gale. I have such a soft spot for Gale. The guy is a genius chemist. He makes incredible coffee. He recites poetry. And Walt is just mercilessly kicking him to the curb.
And you have to look at why he's doing it. Walt claims they aren't working well together, which is such a flimsy corporate speak excuse.
It makes no sense to Gale.
Right. Gale is standing there looking at the data, looking at the purity of their product, and he's just deeply confused. Because he's a scientist. To him, the objective results are the only things that matter, and the results are absolutely perfect. So why is he being fired?
It's purely ego, isn't it? Or is it strategy?
It's pure survival. Walt knows he desperately needs to bring Jesse back into the fold. Jesse is actively threatening to press charges against Hank for the beating. Walt needs to buy Jesse's silence to protect his brother-in-law, and the only currency Walt has left is a job. He has to make Jesse a full partner again.
So Gale is basically just the collateral damage of Walt's messy family drama.
Precisely. And the transition between the two chemists is just brutal to watch. Gale, the consummate, polite professional, is quietly ushered out. And right on cue, in walks Jesse.
The source notes describe Jesse here as uncouth and unprofessional, which is honestly hilarious. He walks into this multi-million-dollar, state-of-the-art, pristine laboratory, and he's acting like a little kid in a candy store.
He really is.
He's spinning around in the expensive chairs, touching all the calibrated equipment.
There's this great moment where Gale looks at Jesse, this kid in the oversized baggy hoodie, who clearly doesn't know a volumetric flask from a bong, and Gale realizes, wait, this is my replacement.
It's incredibly insulting.
It is deeply insulting to Gale's entire professional life, but it also signals to us, the audience, that the whole operation is actively degrading. They are trading pure competence for loyalty, or, well, more accurately, trading it for blackmail.
But the operation has rules. And this is where we get a really stark reminder that this isn't just Walt's fun little playground. Victor Gus's absolutely terrifying henchman steps in. He doesn't care about the personnel changes or the drama. He cares about one thing.
And quota.
We have a schedule. That's what he says. It's such a mundane, almost middle management thing to say while standing in a massive illegal meth lab, but it establishes a very real ticking clock.
It's the heartbeat of the criminal underworld. You can have all the family tragedies you want, you can have petty personnel disputes, but the product absolutely has to move. If you miss the weekly quota, you become a liability to the business.
And we know what happens to liability.
Right. In Gus Fring's organization, liabilities don't get fired. They get buried in the desert.
So that pressure is really building down in the lab. And then the two worlds finally collide. Jesse gets the news about Hank being in the hospital, and he casually tells Walt.
And this is where Walt has to do that specific thing he does so well. He has to switch masks.
In a split second.
Yes. Down in the lab, he's Heisenberg. He's in control. But the second he hears about Hank, he has to instantly put on the concerned brother-in-law mask. He has to rush out and get to the hospital.
Which brings us to the main setting of the episode. The waiting room. Walt arrives, and it's just a complete nightmare scenario for him. You have the entire DEA presence there, you have his whole family there, and you have the story being told.
The official story. Steve Gomez and George Merkert, the big boss at the DEA office, they fill Walt in on what happened. And they are visibly shaken. You have to remember, these are hardened, veteran law enforcement officers, but they're describing this attack by the cousins with a real sense of awe.
Gomez says something like he didn't even have his gun.
Right. He took down 2 cartel assassins without his gun. It completely elevates Hank to this mythical status among his peers. He's not just an agent to them anymore. He's a warrior who survived an impossible ambush.
But not everyone in that waiting room is ready to build a bronze statue for Hank. We definitely have to talk about Marie.
Oh, Marie. She is a force of nature in this episode.
If you look at that emotional debris theme we brought up earlier, Marie is absolute ground zero. She is sitting in that waiting room, utterly terrified, and she is lashing out at everything that moves. She desperately needs someone to blame.
Because extreme fear very often manifests as anger. It's a basic psychological defense mechanism. She can't fight the literal bullets that are inside her husband, so she fights the living people standing around in the room.
First, she goes right after the DEA. She starts yelling at Merkert and Gomez. She completely blames them for taking Hank's gun away in the first place.
Which, to be fair, is a totally valid emotional reaction for a spouse to have, even if it's not logically fair. Hank lost his badge and gun because he brutally beat a private citizen half to death. The DEA simply followed their standard protocol.
Yeah, they had to suspend him.
But a grieving wife doesn't care about HR protocol when her husband is dying on an operating table.
But then, and this is crazy, she turns and she looks right at Walt.
This is the moment where all the air just violently leaves the room.
She blames Walt. She points a finger directly at him and says, essentially, this is all your fault.
Just imagine being Walt in that exact split second. Your heart must completely stop. You think, she knows. It's all over. I'm caught.
But then she explains why she blames him. And it is arguably the most incredible piece of dramatic irony in the entire series.
She blames him because he bought marijuana from Jesse Pinkman.
It's almost funny, isn't it? In a really dark, twisted way.
It's pure tragic comedy.
Yeah.
She connects these invisible dots out loud. Walt bought pot from Jesse. Therefore, Jesse got Hank's phone number. Therefore, Hank investigated Jesse. Therefore, Hank got suspended. Therefore, Hank was unarmed when the cartel showed up. In her mind, the absolute root cause of this massive international cartel hit is a tiny bag of weed.
It highlights just how little she actually knows about the monster standing right in front of her. She's screaming about marijuana, while the man taking the abuse is the literal reason the cartel is even looking north of the border.
It's a brilliant writing choice by Jennifer Hutchison, because it gives Walt a plausible way out of the accusation, but it also violently twists the knife.
He has to just heat it.
He has to stand there and take all this vitriol, knowing that he's 100% guilty, but for crimes 1,000 times worse than she can even imagine. He can't defend himself without revealing the terrible truth, so he just has to absorb her hatred.
But he can't stay comfortable in that victim role for long, because just down the hallway there is a loose end, a very, very dangerous loose end.
Lionel Salamanca.
One of the cousins. The other one, Marco, is dead from the shootout. But Lionel survived. Barely. He's had his legs amputated, but he is alive, and he is being treated in the exact same hospital.
Just think about the sheer logistics of that for a second. The man who tried to axe murder your brother-in-law is recovering 3 doors down the hall. It's a recipe for absolute disaster.
So Gomez and Walt go down the hall to view him. They stand outside his room, just looking through the little glass window in the door. And this scene, man, this scene is straight out of a horror movie.
It really breaks the standard genre conventions. Usually, in a police procedural or a crime drama, the surviving suspect is handcuffed to the bed rails, maybe unconscious, hooked up to a million machines. But here, we have a literal monster.
Lionel wakes up, and he sees Walt through the glass.
And this is the ultimate I see you moment of the episode, the silent recognition between them.
Describe what happens next, because the production notes here really emphasize how incredibly physical this acting performance is.
Lionel doesn't scream. He doesn't call out for a lawyer. He doesn't point and shout, "That's the guy." Instead, he violently rips the IV lines right out of his arms. And despite having no legs, these are freshly amputated bleeding stumps, he throws himself out of the hospital bed.
And he crawls.
He crawls across the floor toward the door, directly toward Walt.
Post speaker. Here's where it gets really interesting. That image of him dragging his upper body, leaving a thick trail of blood on the pristine hospital tiles, with that look of pure, concentrated, silent hatred on his face, that's absolutely terrifying.
It's primal. It's like watching The Terminator. It shows the audience that the cartel's rage completely transcends basic physical limitation. He is willing to bleed to death on that floor just to get his hands around Heisenberg's throat.
And for Walt, this is the massive pivot point of the season. Up until now, standing in that hallway, he might have been able to convince his own ego that this was just random cartel violence. Oh, Hank is a prominent DEA agent, he made a bust, these things happen.
Right, he could rationalize it away, but when Lionel locks eyes with him through that glass and starts furiously crawling, the illusion completely shatters into a million pieces. Walt realizes, they didn't come for Hank, they came for me.
The walls are rapidly closing in. He realizes that Hank was just unfortunate collateral damage. The real target was Heisenberg all along.
And that shifts the entire dynamic of the episode moving forward. Now, Walt isn't just a sad, grieving family member drinking bad coffee. He is a man under active siege. He knows that as long as Lionel is drawing breath down the hall, he is in mortal danger. If Lionel talks to the DEA, or if Lionel manages to write down a single name on a notepad, it's over.
So while Walt is practically hyperventilating in the hospital hallway, the show does something really interesting structurally. It zooms out, way, way out. We leave the claustrophobia of the Albuquerque hospital and we go all the way down to Mexico.
This is a really crucial expansion of the show's world. Up to this point in the series, the cartel has been this vague, menacing, almost faceless force. But now we get to see the actual boardroom politics of it. We meet Juan Bolsa.
Bolsa is a very high-ranking boss. He's the guy who reports directly to the big, unseen leaders of the cartel. And he is on the phone with Gus Fring. And Bolsa is panicking.
Which is very strange to see. High-level cartel bosses don't usually panic. But Bolsa is totally freaking out. Why? Because the brazen attack on Hank has triggered a massive nuclear-level response from the U.S. government.
This is something I really wanted to ask you about, actually. We always hear these terms like political pressure and border crackdowns in shows, but what does that actually mean in the reality of this criminal world? Why does shooting one single cop in Albuquerque matter so much to a billionaire in a mansion down in Mexico?
It's the butterfly effect of the global drug trade. When a U.S. federal agent is attacked, especially by foreign nationals, the U.S. government doesn't just send a couple detectives to investigate the crime scene. They shut down the entire border.
So the trucks just stop moving.
Everything stops. The source notes mention that the Mexican government, acting under immense political pressure from the U.S., has launched a massive, coordinated crackdown. They are kicking in doors, they are raiding key stash houses, they are intensely manning every border checkpoint. For a massive logistical business like the cartel, which entirely relies on the seamless, uninterrupted flow of product going north and cash coming south, this is a complete catastrophe. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's like closing the Suez Canal for global shipping.
Yeah.
They're losing millions and millions of dollars every single day.
So Bolsa's looking at his ledgers and just seeing red everywhere.
And he immediately suspects foul play. He's a smart guy. He knows the cousins personally. He tells Gus on the phone, Marco and Lionel would never attack a DEA agent without explicit upper-level approval. They are disciplined soldiers. They follow orders to the letter. So Bolsa is asking the extremely dangerous question, who exactly gave the order?
He suspects Gus. Or at least he strongly suspects Gus is somehow involved in pulling the strings. And Bolsa has a plan to figure it out. He tells Gus, I'm going to get the truth. I'm going to send someone to interrogate Lionel.
And that statement right there is the absolute death knell. Because if Bolsa talks to Lionel, he instantly finds out that Gus was the one who gave the green light for the hit. If that happens, the entire might of the cartel turns directly on Gus. It's total war.
So Gus is in an incredibly tight bind. He has the Mexican cartel breathing down his neck from the south, and he has the U.S. DEA investigating the aftermath in Albuquerque.
It's a 4D chess game.
And Gus is just about to make his master move.
Meanwhile, back in the U.S., Walt is just desperately trying to stall. He's spending all his time physically at the hospital, completely ignoring the superlab. But he knows he can't ignore Gus Fring forever. Gus calls him. And the tension in this particular phone call is just palpable. Walt is trapped in a lie. He can't simply tell Gus, hey, I'm stuck at the hospital because the DEA agent you just tried to have murdered happens to be my brother-in-law. He desperately wants to keep those two worlds entirely separate.
So he lies through his teeth. He tells Gus that the meth production is delayed. And going all the way back to our earlier point about the lab, he blames Gale.
He throws Gale right under the bus again. He tells Gus that Gale made a huge mistake, set the whole cook back. It's such an incredibly slimy move by Walt. But to buy his own life, to buy some temporary patience from a drug lord, Walt makes a massive promise, and this is where the math gets really, really scary.
He promises Gus 400 pounds of meth.
Let's just pause and reflect on that number for a second. 400 pounds.
That's about 180 kilograms of pure methamphetamine.
Think back to the early days in the broken-down RV. They were celebrating, high-fiving each other when they managed to make, 40 pounds over a long weekend? This new number is industrial scale. This is heavy factory work.
And he promises to deliver it by next week.
It's physically impossible for two men to cook that much without working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It completely changes the fundamental nature of the job. Walt isn't a proud artisan anymore. He's a sweatshop worker. He is promising to literally enslave himself to the lab equipment just to keep Gus from asking too many questions.
He's cooking purely for survival now, not for his family's financial profit.
Exactly. The millions of dollars don't matter anymore. The meth is just the weekly rent he has to pay to stay breathing.
So Walt makes the desperate promise. He hangs up. He thinks he's bought himself some breathing room. And then the doors to the hospital waiting room slide open, and in walks the absolute last person on Earth Walt wants to see right now.
Gus Fring himself.
Host speaker. Here's where it gets really interesting. Gus isn't wearing his intimidating dark suit. He's not acting like a ruthless cartel distributor. He's wearing his bright yellow manager shirt. And he's carrying, is that a giant bucket of chicken?
It is. He literally brings fresh food from Los Pollos Hermanos for the grieving family and the police officers.
I have to ask about the chicken detail. It seems almost comical when you watch it. It's totally absurd. He brings a bucket of fast food fried chicken to a bloody trauma ward.
It definitely seems funny to us sitting on the couch, but think about the psychological power move happening here. The chicken is a prop. It instantly disarms every single person in that room. You fundamentally cannot be terrified of the polite guy handing you a crispy drumstick and some napkins. It effectively renders him completely invisible to the hardened cops. To them, he's just a nice, civic-minded local business owner showing a little support for law enforcement.
It's camouflage.
It's absolutely perfect camouflage. He is casually walking straight into the lion's den, surrounded by the very federal agents whose sole job is to hunt him down, and he is hand-feeding them lunch. It creates this wild cognitive dissonance for the viewer. The man who personally ordered the brutal hit is gently comforting the sobbing wife of the victim.
It's chilling to watch. And he methodically meets everyone. He politely shakes Murkert's hand. He formally meets Marie, and then he slowly corners Walt.
He tells everyone this polite little anecdote about meeting Hank previously at the DEA office. And tucked right inside that friendly story, he drops a massive bomb on Walt. He lets Walt know, without ever saying it directly out loud, I know exactly who Hank is. I knew he was DEA the whole time. I know everything about you.
It strips Walt totally naked, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
He really thought he had this one safe secret, this one impenetrable firewall between his dark criminal life and his innocent family. And Gus just smiled and walked right through it with a side of coleslaw.
And then they step aside for a brief, private moment. Walt, who is just visibly terrified, tries to assure Gus that Hank won't ever be a problem for their business. He's begging for Hank's life, essentially, right there in the hallway. And Gus just looks at him with those completely dead, calm eyes and says something very cryptic.
He says, I see that you are concerned. And then he says something specific about Lionel.
He softly implies that Lionel will not be a problem anymore.
Will not be a problem. That is a very specific, corporate, passive voice way of saying, I'm going to have this man murdered today.
And that threat leads us right into the climax of the episode. The violent silencing of the loose ends.
Because we suddenly realized that Gus's friendly visit wasn't just a PR move or a social call. It was a calculated distraction.
While everyone is happily eating chicken and loudly praising Mr. Fring's incredible generosity in the waiting room, we see another familiar figure moving through the background of the hospital. Mike Ehrmantraut.
The ultimate fixer. The grandpa assassin.
He quietly slips right into Lionel's guarded room. And no one notices him at all because the hospital is naturally chaotic and the police guards outside the door are totally distracted by the free food Gus just handed them.
We just see Mike calmly disposing of a used syringe into a sharps container, and mere moments later, crash.
The medical alarms start blaring. Lionel goes into sudden cardiac arrest. The doctors rush in, and he dies.
Just like that, the unstoppable crawling monster, the only witness to Walt's identity, the massive loose end, just gone.
And you really have to look at the reaction to this death, because this is the bitter pill of the episode. Gomez hears the news from the doctors that Lionel is dead, and he actually cheers. He celebrates in the hallway. He literally calls it good riddance to a monster.
He has absolutely no idea that a cold-blooded murder just took place 50 feet away, right under his nose.
He has no idea that he is actively celebrating a massive strategic victory for Gus Fring. The DEA is thrilled the bad guy is finally dead, totally unaware that his sudden death just helped some much bigger bad guys stay safely in business. Gus perfectly used the DEA's own blinding hatred of the cartel assassin to seamlessly cover up his own tracks.
But Gus isn't quite done yet, is he? The spider web he's weaving is much bigger than just one hospital in New Mexico. We have to cut back to Mexico one last time. We are back with Juan Bolsa at his compound.
And remember, Bolsa was the one asking all the dangerous questions earlier. He was the one who was going to send men to interrogate Leanna.
But I certainly won't be doing that now.
No, he won't, because suddenly, out of nowhere, his sprawling estate is completely surrounded. The federales are heavily armed and at his front gate.
And this is where the truly evil genius of Gus's master plan becomes entirely clear to the audience. We really need to break this sequence down because it's incredibly complex.
It's a massive, calculated domino effect. Gus deliberately allowed the hit on Hank to happen. He knew it would instantly trigger the U.S. government's fury. He knew the U.S. would apply crippling political pressure to Mexico. He knew the Mexican police would be forced to loudly raid the cartel bosses to save face.
So he essentially used the entire United States government as his own personal free hit squad.
Exactly. He weaponized the DEA and the federales. The police raid Bolsa's house not because Gus secretly paid them off, but because the geopolitical pressure Gus engineered demanded a high-profile target.
And Bolsa realizes this, doesn't he? Right at the very end.
In his absolute final moments on Earth, yes. He's trapped in his office, he hears the heavy gunfire outside, the phone goes dead, and he suddenly realizes Gus did this. Gus orchestrated all of this from the beginning.
He screams into the phone that the cartel will strike back, but it's just way too late.
His heavily armed bodyguards are systematically shot down. Bolsa tries to desperately run through his beautiful courtyard, and he is just gunned down by the police.
And just like that, the biggest rival is permanently removed from the board.
Gus Fring has achieved total, flawless victory. He eliminated the cousins, who were chaotic and dangerous. He eliminated Juan Bolsa, who was technically his boss and his biggest rival, and he managed to do all of it without ever firing a single shot himself. He just sat back and let everyone else do the messy, dirty work.
It's incredibly Machiavellian.
It's honestly beyond Machiavellian. It's total strategic dominance. He took a wildly chaotic, dangerous situation, a bloody personal vendetta against the local DEA agent, and he manipulated it into a complete corporate restructuring of the cartel. He cleared the entire board. Remember we said earlier, while everyone else is playing simple checkers, Gus Fring is playing 4D chess.
So we've covered the plot mechanics, the terrifying crawling assassin, the weirdly weaponized fried chicken, and the geopolitical 4D chess. But let's take a step back and look at how this specific episode was actually received when it aired. Because you mentioned earlier that it's a bit divisive among fans and critics.
It really is. When you go back and look at the actual reviews from May 2010, people were very visibly split on the whole hospital drama aspect of the hour.
Give me an example of the split.
Well, on the positive side, IGN gave it a 9.4 out of 10. They absolutely loved it. They heavily focused on that emotional debris aspect we talked about at the start. They thought it was incredibly brave of the showrunners to purposely slow the pace down and just let the characters sit and suffer with the consequences.
But clearly, not everyone agreed with that take.
No, definitely not. The AV Club, for instance, was much more critical of the writing. Their reviewer felt the hospital scenes were just filled with tired TV cliches. You know, the standard waiting room anxiety, the sudden tearful outbursts they felt, it really dragged the overall pacing of the season down.
I can honestly see that argument. If you tune into Breaking Bad expecting train heists and explosive chemistry experiments, a 40-minute tense waiting room scene might feel a bit slow.
And that critical split is actually reflected in the modern rankings, too. We pulled some data from current retrospective rankings of all 62 episodes of the series. The Ringer ranked this episode 47th overall. And Vulture, they ranked it way down at 61st.
61st out of 62. That's literally second to last. That seems insanely harsh for an episode where a legless cartel hitman crawls down a bloody hallway to try and kill the main protagonist.
I think it really suffers from what you might call middle child syndrome. It's fundamentally a bridge episode. Its primary narrative job is to move all the complicated plot pieces from the massive chaos of 1 minute to set up the grand finale of the season. It has to do all the heavy, unglamorous lifting of plot mechanics, killing the cousins, freeing Gus from the cartel, getting Walt back in the lab. Sometimes, those necessary utility episodes just don't get the critical love they actually deserve because they aren't as flashy as the ones with the big explosions.
That makes sense. It's like the offensive lineman of TV episodes. It does all the hard blocking in the trenches so the quarterback can score the flashy touchdown later.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. But interestingly enough, the actual viewing audience at the time didn't seem to care about the slower pacing at all. The viewership numbers actually went up. 1.78 million people watched this episode live, which was a really nice solid bump up from the 1.52 million for the previous week. People were absolutely hooked. They just desperately needed to know if Hank survived the shootout.
And they got their answer. Hank lives, but the world he lives in has fundamentally changed.
The world has become much, much darker for everyone involved.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive today, let's try to distill all of this down for you. What are the big essential takeaways from I See You?
I think there are three main things you need to walk away with. First, the title really is the core theme, visibility. The protective veil is completely lifted. Walt finally realizes he is a vulnerable target. The cartel finally realizes exactly who Walt is, and Gus finally reveals he knows everything about everyone. In this universe, there are no more secrets left, only lies.
That's a really great distinction. No secrets, only lies. What's the second big takeaway?
The graduation of Gus Fring. This is the specific episode where he officially stops being just a cautious drug distributor and truly becomes a mastermind supervillain. The sheer terrifying complexity of his plan manipulating the U.S. and Mexican governments as expendable pawns, it shows a level of ruthless ambition that Walt can't even comprehend yet.
And the third takeaway?
The emotional debris. We just can't ignore the devastating human cost of this lifestyle. Marie is psychologically broken. Jesse is rapidly becoming a desensitized sociopath. Hank is physically shattered, maybe forever. The show is explicitly telling us that you can't have this massive amount of violence in your life without it completely destroying the innocent people around you. It's a toxic blast radius.
I really want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought about that blast radius. Think about Walt's desperate promise to Gus on the phone, 400 pounds of meth.
The ultimate deal with the devil.
Because before this episode, Walt could still lie to himself and say he was a free man, he was an entrepreneur, he was the boss of his own destiny. But now, he has a strict quota, he has a terrifying deadline, and he has a boss who can easily have people murdered inside a police-guarded intensive care unit.
He's definitely not a partner anymore.
Exactly. So you have to ask yourself, at what exact point does the supposed employee become the prisoner? When you are frantically cooking meth just to keep your wife and children from being hacked to death by the cartel, you aren't an emperor building an empire. You're just a slave to the lab.
And that dark realization is the question that is going to aggressively drive the entire rest of the series.
On that incredibly cheerful note, no, really, this episode is an absolute masterpiece of slow burn tension. I strongly encourage you to go back and just rewatch that one scene with Gus in the waiting room. Just watch his face, watch exactly how he navigates that physical space with the chicken. It is a complete masterclass in subtle acting from Giancarlo Esposito, the terrifying calmness of a man who just ordered multiple executions while handing out napkins.
Absolutely. It is, without a doubt, the scariest friendly visit in television history.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hospital pressure cooker. We'll be back next time to see exactly how Walt manages to cook 400 pounds of meth in a week without completely losing his mind. See you then.
See you then.